All right, so today we are going to be diving deep into Connor Beaton's Men's Work,
Oh, yeah.
a practical guide to face your darkness, end self-sabotage, and find freedom.
It's a good one.
It is a good one. It's been making the rounds, and I think it's particularly relevant for anyone who's kind of felt lost or stuck, especially guys who've gotten this message that, like, they need to be different.
Right.
But there hasn't really been a clear path forward.
Totally.
So we're going to break down some of the core messages in this book
Yeah.
and how you can actually use it in your own life.
You hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
One of the things Beaton does so well is capture this this feeling of a crisis of masculinity.
Yeah.
Like there's this intense pressure on men to be different,
Right.
but without a clear understanding of what that even means. He talks about this intensity that men carry, and it's not always a bad thing. It's the intensity of their emotions, like pain, confusion, anger, that often gets suppressed because they haven't learned how to deal with it.
It's like society gives men this box labeled feelings and says, okay, put all that messy stuff in there and just like
Right.
be more vulnerable. But then what Beaton gets, that it's not that simple.
Mm-hmm.
He points out that men often end up resorting to like these unhealthy coping mechanisms. I mean, we've all heard of suck it up, stuff it down,
Right.
or just numbing out with whatever's handy.
Yeah.
Right.
And what's fascinating is that these strategies, while they might seem to work in the short term,
Yeah.
ultimately prevent men from really connecting
Yeah.
with themselves and others. This is where Beaton brings in the concept of the shadow self, which can sound a little intimidating,
Right.
but it's actually a really useful idea. Think of
Mhm.
it like this. It's all the stuff we try to hide, even from ourselves, because it doesn't fit the image we want to project.
Okay.
For men, it might be insecurity, neediness, or even self-sabotaging behaviors.
Yeah.
Beaton even talks about a friend who attempted suicide but kept it completely hidden.
Wow. So he actually lists a bunch of things that might
Yeah.
be lurking in a man's shadow, like fear of failure, the need to be perfect,
Yep.
even our unexpressed creativity. I think we can all relate to that feeling of wanting to hide parts of ourselves, even if we haven't gone to those extremes.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
and the key takeaway here is that this shadow isn't something to be feared
Right.
or ashamed of. It's actually a source of untapped potential.
Yeah.
Beaton argues that by confronting and integrating these shadow parts, we can become more authentic, more whole, and ultimately more free.
Okay, so that's such a different way of looking at our so-called flaws. I'm curious, how does Beaton suggest we actually start to do this shadow work?
Well, he provides a really practical framework,
Okay.
starting with the idea of the shadow of the father. Basically, he's saying that every man carries the influence of his father,
Yeah.
whether it's positive or negative.
So even if you had a great dad, there's still a shadow there.
Absolutely. It's more about the patterns
Oh.
and expectations that get passed down.
Yeah.
Often unconsciously, he outlines different father archetypes, like the absent father, the abusive father, the overly critical father, the kind of father who maybe wasn't emotionally available
Yeah.
or who had a very specific idea of what it meant to be a man.
I remember Beaton shares a story about a guy named John who really idolized his dad,
Right.
but then struggled to grieve his death because he felt like he had to be stoic and
Yeah.
unemotional, just like his father always was.
That's such a powerful example of how these unconscious patterns can play out.
Yeah.
And it highlights the impact a father's relationship with anger, for instance, can have on a son. If a father suppresses his anger, the son might learn to do the same,
Right.
even if it's unhealthy.
So it's not just about the big dramatic traumas. It's these seemingly small things can have a huge impact on how we develop.
And this leads to one of the most important ideas in the book, the concept of passing it back or passing it on.
Okay.
Essentially, we can either become aware of the pain and patterns we've inherited from our fathers and choose to feel them, or we unconsciously perpetuate those patterns in our own lives and relationships.
So it's not about blaming our fathers. It's
Yeah.
about recognizing that these early experiences have shaped us
Exactly.
and then making a conscious choice to break free from those cycles if they're not serving us.
Precisely. And Beaton provides a framework
Okay.
for doing just that. He talks about the trap of either opposing our father's ways
Right.
or unconsciously repeating them. Like there's this guy, James, who had an affair
Oh, wow.
as a way of rebelling against his father's strict expectations. He spent his whole life trying to be the perfect son, and then he completely self-destructed.
That's a pretty extreme example.
Yeah.
But I can see how that dynamic plays out in more subtle ways.
Right.
Like if you had a workaholic father,
Right.
you might either swing to the opposite extreme and become totally unambitious,
All right.
or you might end up following in his footsteps,
Yeah.
even if it makes you miserable.
Right. And that awareness is the first step. Once
Yeah.
you see the pattern,
Yeah.
you can start to make different choices.
This brings us to one of the most intriguing ideas in the book,
Yeah.
the concept of fathering yourself.
Yeah.
Now, I'll admit, when I first heard that phrase, I thought, what in the world does that even mean?
I had the same reaction. But Beaton actually explains it in
Yeah.
a really beautiful way.
Yeah.
He's basically saying that we all have this inner child who needs guidance, support, and love.
Yeah.
And if we didn't receive that from our fathers,
Right.
we have the power to provide it for ourselves now.
So it's like stepping into that fatherly role for yourself. I'm starting to see how this connects to the idea of healing those old wounds.
Right.
And breaking free from those negative patterns.
Exactly. And it's not about beating ourselves up for what we didn't get.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing what we need
Yeah.
and then giving it to ourselves with compassion and understanding.
Right.
Beaton even admits that he struggled with this,
Oh, wow.
saying he felt like a terrible steward
Wow.
to his inner child at times.
That's a pretty vulnerable admission from a guy who's known for helping men step into their power. I'm curious, how does he suggest we actually start to father ourselves? Is there a specific technique or practice?
It's more about a mindset shift.
Okay.
Beaton emphasizes that working with our pain can actually provide direction. It illuminates what needs to be forgiven, accepted, or developed.
Right.
He asks a really thought-provoking question. What is your pain trying to teach you? Which I think is something we'll want to come back to, because that question applies to so much more than just our relationship with our fathers. It's relevant to all areas of our lives.
It's a good point. It's like our pain is a messenger trying to get our attention and point us in the right direction.
And fathering ourselves is about becoming that loving, supportive guide who can listen to that message and help us navigate those difficult emotions.
Okay, so it's interesting that Beaton focuses so much on the father-son dynamic. Is that because it's more important than a man's relationship with his mother?
He actually dedicates a whole section to the shadow of the mother,
Okay.
which he argues is just as significant.
Okay.
He says that a man's relationship with his mother shapes his expectations of women,
Right.
influences his nervous system development, and impact his overall sense of security in the world.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, our mothers are usually our primary caregivers in those early years.
Right. And Beaton dives into these different mother archetypes, like the overprotective mother, the neglectful mother, the critical and contemptuous mother, the wounded mother, and even the saint.
Yeah.
Each one leaving a unique imprint on a man's psyche.
He shares a pretty heartbreaking story about a guy named Lyle who ended up seeking paid sex.
Right.
Because he felt so betrayed by both his biological and adoptive mothers.
Yeah, that's a powerful story.
It really underscores how those early wounds can impact our ability to connect in healthy ways.
And again, it's not about blaming our mothers.
Right.
It's about understanding how those early dynamics have shaped us and then doing the work to heal those wounds and create healthier patterns in our own lives.
It seems like Beaton is really challenging a lot of the conventional wisdom about masculinity. You know, that whole boys don't cry mentality.
Absolutely. He even takes on this myth that simply opening up or being vulnerable will solve all of a man's problems.
Yeah.
He argues that what women really want is not for men to just spill their guts all over the place.
Yeah.
But to see a man who is aware of his emotions and capable of regulating them.
So it's not about suppressing emotions or having emotional outbursts.
No.
It's about finding that balance.
Exactly. He calls this regulated vulnerability.
Okay.
And even gives tips on how to practice it. For example, being mindful of the context and setting boundaries when sharing with a partner.
Yeah.
It's about being thoughtful about how and when we express our emotions, which I think is a really valuable skill for anyone, not just men.
It's interesting that he uses the word regulated. It's like he's saying that vulnerability is a strength, but it needs to be managed like any other powerful force.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it ties into another really important concept in the book, nervous system regulation.
Oh, okay.
Beaton explains that a lot of the challenges men face, anxiety, anger, depression, even addiction,
Yeah.
are rooted in a dysregulated nervous system. It's like our internal alarm system is constantly going off,
Right.
even when there's no real danger present.
Yeah. That makes sense because, I mean, we all know that stress can manifest in all sorts of physical and emotional ways.
Exactly. And what's so powerful about Beaton's approach
Yeah.
is that he offers practical tools
Okay.
for calming the nervous system and building resilience.
So how do we do that?
He talks about the importance of breath work, grounding techniques, and even things like yoga and spending time in nature.
Those are all things I try to incorporate into my own life. It's
Yeah.
amazing how such simple practices can have such a profound impact on our well-being.
Yeah.
Right.
He also talks about the importance of confronting our fears, which is a theme that runs throughout the book.
I'm curious, how does Beaton suggest we approach our fears?
He emphasizes that fear is a natural part of life,
Yeah.
but it's how we respond to it that matters.
Okay.
He encourages us to identify our fears, understand their root causes,
Okay.
and then consciously choose to engage with them rather than avoid them.
That sounds a lot easier said than done.
It definitely takes courage.
Yeah.
But Beaton offers some concrete steps we can take. He suggests creating a confrontation commitment,
Okay.
where you write out a specific fear you want to face,
Right.
and then read that commitment out loud every morning. It's like making a promise to yourself to step outside of your comfort zone and embrace the challenge.
That's a really interesting idea. It's like we're actively choosing to lean into the things that scare us rather than letting them control us.
He uses the analogy of sharpening a blade.
Oh, okay.
The more we expose ourselves to the things that challenge us,
Yeah.
the stronger and more resilient we become.
Right.
And I think that's a really empowering message, especially in a world that often tells us to avoid discomfort at all costs.
I like that analogy. It makes me think about how we often try to protect ourselves from pain and discomfort.
Yeah.
But in doing so, we might actually be preventing ourselves from growing and becoming more fully ourselves.
Exactly.
I mean, he also delves into a topic that I think a lot of men struggle with. Shame. It's something that we often keep hidden,
Right.
which only makes it more powerful.
It's like that saying, shame dies in the light.
Exactly.
Right.
Beaton argues that bringing our shame into the open is often the first step towards healing it. He suggests naming the shame,
Okay.
reframing the thoughts that trigger it, and practicing self-compassion.
It sounds like he's advocating for a much gentler, more understanding approach to ourselves. Instead of beating ourselves up for our perceived flaws,
Yeah.
we can choose to meet ourselves with kindness and acceptance.
And that's a radical act,
Yeah.
especially for men who've been conditioned to believe that self-criticism is the path to improvement. Beaton is essentially saying, hey, let's try something different. Let's try loving ourselves through the messiness and seeing what happens.
That's a message I think we all need to hear. It's not about being perfect.
Yeah.
It's about being human. Absolutely. And that brings us to another really important concept, accountability.
Yeah.
Beaton emphasizes that we need other people in our lives
Yeah.
who will challenge us,
Right.
support us, and
Yeah.
hold us accountable to our goals.
So I'm curious, what does he say about finding the right people to hold us accountable?
He stresses the importance of choosing wisely.
Okay.
He says we shouldn't seek accountability from people who haven't earned our trust
Right.
or who might have ulterior motives.
Yeah.
He also acknowledges that not all accountability is created equal. Sometimes we need to ignore advice or feedback
Right.
that doesn't align with our values or goals.
So it's not just about finding someone who will tell us what we want to hear.
Right.
It's about finding people who will challenge us
Exactly.
to grow and become the best versions of ourselves.
Yeah, he talks about the importance of reciprocal accountability,
Ah.
where both parties are equally invested in each other's growth. And he really emphasizes the power of brotherhood, having a tribe of men who will support us on our journey.
I think that's something a lot of men are craving, that sense of connection and belonging. And Beaton gives some really practical advice on how to cultivate that. He suggests being direct about our intentions for connection and growth, seeking out groups and activities aligned with our values,
Yeah.
and engaging in reciprocal accountability with trusted men.
Hmm.
It's like he's providing a roadmap
Yeah.
for building a supportive community, which is so important, especially in a world that can feel increasingly isolating.
And it all comes back to this idea of man it forward,
Okay, yeah.
which is essentially about passing on the wisdom and support we've received
Right.
to others.
So what are some specific examples of how we can man it forward?
Beaton suggests checking in on men who are struggling, offering a listening ear, sharing resources that have helped us, and creating opportunities for connection and growth. He even talks about gifting books or podcasts that have had a positive impact on our lives
Right.
to men who might benefit from them.
I love that. It's like a ripple effect of positive masculinity, where
Yeah.
men are lifting each other up
Mm.
and creating a more supportive world for everyone.
And it all starts
Right.
with doing our own inner work, facing our shadows, and stepping into our full potential as men.
This has been such a rich conversation so far, and we've only just scratched the surface of what Beaton covers in this book.
Oh, really?
There's a lot to unpack here.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to hear what stands out to you the most from what we've discussed so far.
Well, you know what struck me the most
Yeah.
is this idea that vulnerability is not weakness.
Right.
It actually takes a lot of courage to face our shadows, to acknowledge our imperfections, and to ask for help when we need it. And Beaton is really challenging us to redefine what it means to be a man in a way that embraces those qualities.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
And I think it ties into this larger cultural shift that's happening.
Right.
Where we're starting to question those old rigid ideas about masculinity and create space for a more nuanced, authentic expression
Yeah.
of what it means to be a man.
It's like we're finally having this long overdue conversation about what healthy masculinity looks like.
Right.
And how we can support men in becoming the best versions of themselves.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's not just about men.
Right.
It's about creating a more equitable and compassionate world
Totally.
for everyone.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way.
I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation
Too.
and exploring some of the other key ideas in the book.
Yeah, we've got a lot more ground to cover, so stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into Connor Beaton's men's work. You won't want to miss it.
It's going to be good.
Yeah.
You know, as we move further into this exploration of men's work,
Yeah.
one of the things that really struck me was Beaton's discussion of the lie of separation
Okay.
and the cult of specialness.
Right.
These ideas really resonated deeply with me.
Those phrases definitely jumped out at me too. I'm curious to hear your take on what Beaton means by those terms.
Yeah, he's pointing to this pervasive idea that we're all separate, competing against each other
Right.
for resources, validation, success, you name it.
Yeah, totally.
And this sense of separation feeds into the cult of specialness,
Right.
which is this belief that we're either superior to others
Yeah.
or uniquely flawed and unworthy.
It's like we're constantly comparing ourselves to others,
Yeah.
either puffing ourselves up or tearing ourselves down.
Exactly.
It's exhausting.
Exactly. And Beaton argues that this mentality keeps us trapped in these cycles of self-sabotage.
Yeah.
It prevents us from truly connecting with others
Right.
and experiencing that sense of belonging that we all crave.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like when we're so focused on proving ourselves or feeling inadequate, we miss out on the opportunity to just be present and connect with the people around us. There's this great quote in the book that really captures this, where you would normally close off and become emotionally cold, stay open to the heat of the moment or argument, replenish your reserves and resiliency in the act of bringing the fullness of who you are out into the world.
And that's so powerful.
Right.
It's a reminder that true strength lies in vulnerability and connection,
Yeah,
not in isolation and suppression.
totally.
And I think this is where the importance of brotherhood comes in. When we have those genuine connections with other men,
Yeah.
we can start to challenge those limiting beliefs
Right.
and step into a more authentic version of ourselves.
It's like having a mirror reflecting back our strengths and
Yeah.
supporting us through our struggles. Beaton also talks about this idea of integration,
Right.
which I think is closely related to what we've been discussing.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on what he means by that?
Yeah, it's this ongoing process of bringing those those shadow parts of ourselves into the light,
Right.
acknowledging them,
Mm-hmm.
understanding them,
Yeah.
and learning to work with them rather than against them.
Okay.
It's not about getting rid of those parts of ourselves,
Right.
but about integrating them
Yeah.
into a more whole and complete sense of self.
So it's not about denying or suppressing those difficult emotions or those parts of ourselves that we don't like.
Yeah.
It's about learning to accept them
Exactly.
and integrate them into who we are.
He even offers a really practical exercise
Oh,
to
good.
help
Yeah.
with this. He suggests that you imagine connecting to your breath,
Okay.
feeling grounded,
Mm-hmm.
and then allowing your awareness to expand outward,
Right.
making contact with another person. It's a simple exercise, but the goal is to simply notice the connection you feel
Right.
without judgment or the need to fix anything.
That sounds like a really powerful practice in mindfulness and presence.
Yeah.
It reminds me of another key concept from the book, the idea of nervous system regulation.
Hmm.
It feels connected to this idea of being present and learning to regulate our emotions.
It's absolutely crucial because so many of the challenges we face,
Yeah.
whether we're men or women, are rooted
Right.
in a dysregulated nervous system.
Yeah.
Beaton explains that this happens when our system gets stuck
Mm-hmm.
in a state of fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
You know, that feeling of being on edge,
Right.
even when there's no real danger present.
Looks like our body is reacting as
Yeah.
if we're constantly under threat,
Yeah.
even when we're not.
Yeah,
That sounds incredibly draining.
it is, and it can manifest in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
Anxiety, anger, difficulty sleeping,
Yeah.
even digestive issues.
Mhm. Right. So what does Beaton suggest we do to regulate our nervous system? Are there specific exercises or techniques?
He offers a three-step process.
Okay.
First, it's about recognizing the signs of dysregulation,
Mm-hmm.
noticing when you're feeling anxious, irritable, or overwhelmed.
Right.
Then it's about using techniques like breath work and grounding to calm the nervous system down.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, it's about practicing those techniques regularly
Yeah.
to build resilience over time.
So it's not just about addressing the symptoms in the moment. It's
Yeah.
about rewiring our nervous system
That's like,
to respond to stress in a healthier way.
yeah.
It sounds a lot like building a muscle.
Mm-hmm.
The more we practice,
Yeah.
the stronger we become.
That's a great way to put it. And Beaton offers really practical tools for doing that. He's a big advocate for breathwork exercises like box breathing and extending your exhales.
Right.
He also recommends more active practices like yoga, martial arts, or just spending time in nature.
Those are all things I try to incorporate into my own life.
Yeah.
And I've found that even a few minutes of conscious breathing can make a huge difference in how I feel.
Right? It's amazing how such simple practices can be so effective.
Right. You know, I've noticed this theme running through all the concepts we've been discussing, this idea of confronting our fears.
Yeah.
It's like Beaton is encouraging us to step outside of our comfort zone and lean into the things that make us uncomfortable.
He's definitely challenging us to be courageous.
Right.
And he emphasizes that courage isn't about the absence of fear.
Yeah.
It's about acting in spite of it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Because it means that we don't have to wait until we feel fearless to start taking action. We can start taking action now, even if we're feeling scared.
Exactly. And he offers some practical steps for how to do that.
Mhm.
Remember the confrontation commitment?
Right.
Like we talked about earlier. It's a way to intentionally choose a fear we want to face.
Right.
And then commit to working with it.
It's almost like we're giving ourselves permission to be afraid,
Yeah.
but not letting that fear paralyze us.
It's about recognizing that fear is often a sign
Mm-hmm.
that we're growing and expanding beyond our comfort zone.
I think that's such an important message, especially in a culture that often tells us to avoid discomfort at all costs.
Speaking of discomfort,
Yeah.
Beaton also talks about the importance of working with shame,
Mm-hmm.
which is a topic that I think a lot of men struggle with, often in silence.
Shame is definitely a heavy topic, but I appreciate that he doesn't shy away from it.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear how he suggests we approach it.
He acknowledges that shame is a deeply painful emotion,
Mm-hmm.
but he also recognizes its potential for growth.
Okay.
He explains that shame often arises from the belief that we are inherently flawed or unworthy,
Yeah.
and he challenges us to examine those beliefs
Okay.
and replace them with more empowering ones.
So it's not about pretending that we don't feel shame
Oh, yeah.
or trying to push it away.
Yeah,
It's about understanding where it's coming from
exactly.
and challenging the beliefs that are
Okay.
fueling it.
And he emphasizes that shame thrives in secrecy.
Mm-hmm.
It loses its power
Yeah.
when we bring it into the light.
Totally.
He suggests some really practical strategies for doing that,
Yeah.
like naming the shame,
Okay.
reframing the thoughts that trigger it,
Right.
and practicing self-compassion.
Yeah. I love that he emphasizes self-compassion.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, hey, it's okay to feel shame. We all do. But let's not beat ourselves up about it. Let's treat ourselves with kindness and understanding, even when we make mistakes.
And that's such a radical act,
Yeah.
especially for men who've been conditioned.
To be hard on themselves.
Right.
Beaton is essentially saying that self-compassion
Yeah.
is not a sign of weakness.
Right.
It's a sign of strength.
Totally. He also talks about the importance of accountability, both giving and receiving it.
Yeah.
It feels like this is something he emphasizes throughout the book, the importance of having other men in our lives who can support us on this journey.
He's a huge advocate for brotherhood.
Yeah.
And emphasizes that accountability is not about punishment or judgment, but about support and growth.
Right.
He encourages us to seek out relationships with men who will challenge us,
Yeah.
hold us to our commitments, and celebrate our successes.
So it's about having a tribe of men who will love and support us unconditionally, but also who will call us out when we're not living in alignment with our values.
Exactly. He talks about the importance of reciprocal accountability, where both parties are equally invested in each other's growth.
And he also cautions against seeking accountability from people who haven't earned our trust.
Yeah.
Or who might have ulterior motives.
So it's not just about finding any group of guys to hang out with. It's about being discerning
Exactly.
and choosing our accountability partners wisely.
He also acknowledges that not all accountability is created equal.
Right.
Sometimes we need to ignore advice or feedback
Yeah.
that isn't aligned with our values or goals. We get to choose who we allow to speak into our lives.
So it's about being mindful and intentional about the people we surround ourselves with and being selective about the advice we take to heart.
Exactly.
This all feels very connected to that idea of man it forward.
Absolutely.
That we discussed earlier.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And that supporting other men is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of true strength. It's about paying it forward and sharing the wisdom and support we've received with others who are on the same journey.
I love that vision. It's like a ripple effect of positive masculinity where men are lifting each other up and creating a more supportive world for everyone.
It's a beautiful vision, and it all starts with doing our own inner work.
Right.
It's about facing our shadows, healing our wounds, and stepping into our full potential as men.
I'm struck by how Beaton doesn't shy away from the big existential questions.
Yeah.
He even talks about the importance of contemplating our own death.
That's right. He encourages us to practice dying before we die.
What exactly does he mean by that? It sounds a little morbid.
It's not about being morbid. It's about gaining perspective.
Okay.
He suggests that we contemplate the reality of our own mortality as a way to clarify what truly matters and to live with more intention.
So it's not about dwelling on death.
Right.
It's about using it as a tool for living a more fulfilling life.
He even talks about meditating on his own death as a way to let go of the things that no longer serve him.
Like what kinds of things?
It could be anything. Outdated beliefs, unfulfilling habits, toxic relationships, anything that's holding us back from living our fullest life.
I think a lot of us are afraid to let go of those things, even when we know they're not good for us. It's like we're clinging to the familiar, even if it's causing us pain.
And that's where the practice of dying before we die comes in. It's about recognizing that endings are a natural part of life, and that by embracing them, we create space for new beginnings.
I'm starting to see how all of these concepts, facing our shadows, regulating our nervous system, confronting our fears, practicing dying before we die, all all tie together.
Yeah.
They're all about letting go of the things that are holding us back and stepping into a more authentic, empowered way of being.
And it's not a one-time thing.
Yes.
It's an ongoing journey. It's about showing up for ourselves every day, doing the inner work,
Right.
and supporting other men
Yeah.
on the same path.
I think that's what I find so inspiring about Beaton's work.
Yeah.
He's not just offering a quick fix or a set of techniques.
Yeah.
He's proposing a whole new way of being in the world, a way of being that is grounded in authenticity, connection, and purpose.
It's a powerful vision, and I think it's one that a lot of men are hungry for.
I'm definitely feeling inspired to keep exploring these ideas and to see how I can put them into practice in my own life. I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have, and there's still so much more to explore in Beaton's work. I'm really looking forward to diving into the last part of this deep dive with you.
You know, as we're wrapping up our deep dive into men's work, it's striking me that Beaton isn't just offering like a self-help program.
Right.
It feels much bigger than that.
Yeah, I agree. He's not just giving us a toolbox for fixing specific problems.
Right.
He's proposing a fundamental shift in how we understand and approach masculinity itself.
Right.
It's like he's calling for a complete redefinition
Yeah.
of what it means to be a man in the modern world.
Yeah, that makes me think back to his discussion of this crisis of masculinity in the first part of this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's like he's offering a way out of that crisis, a new path forward that's based on connection, vulnerability, and purpose.
Exactly. And it's a radical departure from the traditional messages many men have internalized about strength, stoicism, and independence.
Right.
He's challenging those limiting beliefs head on,
Yeah.
arguing that true strength comes from acknowledging our weaknesses, facing our fears, and seeking support when we need it.
Which is so counterintuitive to how many of us were raised. But it resonates with everything we've been talking about so far.
Right.
Like integrating our shadow selves, regulating our nervous systems, even confronting our fears and practicing dying before we die. It's all about letting go of that old rigid definition of masculinity and embracing something more authentic and whole.
Yeah, and it's not just about men.
Okay.
It's about creating a healthier, more balanced world for everyone.
Totally.
When men heal, families heal, communities heal, and ultimately the world heals.
Yeah, I love that perspective. It reminds me of that saying, the whole world is healed when one heart is healed.
Yes.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our personal growth has a ripple effect that extends far beyond ourselves.
This brings us back to that beautiful idea of man it forward. It's not just about working on ourselves in isolation. It's about using what we've learned to support other men on the same journey.
And it doesn't have to be some grand gesture.
Right.
It can be as simple as checking in on a friend who's going through a tough time, offering a listening ear, or sharing a resource that's helped us personally.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And that supporting each other is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of true strength.
Totally.
Beaton talks about how men need other men,
right,
and how this kind of brotherhood is essential for our well-being.
Yeah, it makes me think about the power of mentorship. I've had men in my life who've really helped me along the way, and I'm so grateful for their guidance and support. Now I feel inspired to find ways to offer that same kind of support to other men.
That's the beauty of it. It's like a chain reaction of positive change.
Yeah. It's
about stepping up and saying, hey, I've been there, I know what it's like, and I'm here for you.
Beaton also talks about the importance of legacy. I think that's something a lot of men think about as they get older.
Yeah.
What kind of mark do we want to leave on the world?
He reminds us that our legacy is not just about what we achieve, but about how we live.
Yeah.
It's about the impact we have on the people around us, the lives we touch, and the difference we make.
It's about those everyday acts of kindness, courage, and compassion that ripple outward and create a more loving and just world.
Yeah, he encourages us to live with intention, to be present in our lives, and to make choices that reflect our deepest values.
And to find joy in the journey, even amidst the challenges.
Yes, he reminds us that life is a precious gift. It's a messy, beautiful, unpredictable adventure.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to make the most of it.
And I think Beaton's book offers a powerful roadmap for doing just that. It's not about achieving some idealized version of masculinity. It's about embracing the fullness of who we are with all our imperfections and using our strength to make a positive impact on the world.
Yeah, this deep dive has been such a rich and thought-provoking conversation. I'm feeling really inspired to keep exploring these ideas and to see how I can integrate them into my own life.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I hope our listeners are feeling the same way.
You know, one of the most important takeaway for me is that this work of becoming a man is never truly finished.
Right.
It's an ongoing journey of self-discovery, growth, and connection.
It's about showing up every day, doing the inner work, and supporting each other along the way.
And remembering that we don't have to do it alone.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Connor Beaton's men's work. We hope you found it as insightful and empowering as we did. Until next time, keep diving deep.